There we are. Okay, good to see you all. Islam, changing religions. But some things might seem familiar to you with Islam, actually, since we've studied Judaism and Christianity. Please remember tomorrow is quiz 4, so be on the lookout for quiz number 4. I'm still working on it, but I'll put it up by tomorrow evening, so just so you know. Okie dokie, let's move on to Islam. What can we say? Well, we can say this. According to the book by Todd Johnson and Brian Grimm, The World's Religions and Figures, a couple of sociologists who put together a book which has figures on all the major world religions, and also minor religions as well, smaller religions, I should say, and published as of 2010. Because trying to get numbers, actual numbers, is hard. Actually, even if you go on like the internet and Wikipedia and stuff like that, you have to be careful. But the best I could do is 2010. And as of 2010, there were 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And if you look at this map, you can get an idea where the majority of Muslims are located. Obviously, worldwide, all across the world, but not in the same percentages. Most Muslim population countries are in northern Africa and the Middle East, Asia, and Central Asia. Some places farther across, like this small country called Bangladesh, countries like Malaysia and Indonesia here, okay, but especially in Central Asia, the Middle East, and Northern Africa, and some parts of Sub-Saharan Africa as well. Also, Islam is in some interesting places you might not have assumed that it would be in existence. Like in Central America, in South America, you've got apparently a sizable number of Muslims in this country called Suriname, which used to be a Dutch colony. There are actually three: the Guyana, which was an English colony, or mostly a British colony. It changed hands a number of times. Suriname in the middle here, which was a Dutch colony, and then French Guinea, or Guyana, I should say, which is was a French colony, and is still part of France. It's considered a department of France, actually. So it's not its own country. But apparently, there are a lot of Muslims in Suriname. Don't know why. Probably taken from other places where the Dutch were. Because I know the Dutch were over here at one time, so maybe a lot of people emigrated over to Suriname, the Dutch colony, from there. And in Europe, you can see places like Bosnia, Albania. The country of Albania is mostly Muslim. I should say mostly. 57%. So mostly Islam is located in Asia and Africa. But Albania, I said 57% of Albanians are Muslims. Bosnia, 51%. Okay. So even within Europe, Islam has been there for quite a while and is the majority religion in some places of Europe. Almost a quarter, 23% of the world's population claims adherence to Islam. It's the next largest religion after Christianity. Remember, Christianity is 2.26 billion, and then will come Islam at 1.6 billion. And what is Islam? The word Islam comes from classical Arabic. It's a classical Arabic word, which is another way of saying old Arabic. Okay, it's really an Arabic nobody speaks anymore. I mean, if you're a Muslim, you will have to learn classical Arabic, just like Jews have to learn biblical Hebrew, which is not really spoken anymore. It's not like modern Hebrew. And the same thing with classical Arabic. If you try to speak classical Arabic, like in Libya or someplace, or Saudi Arabia, they probably would not fully understand what you're saying, or it would sound like Old English to them. Old English would sound to us because it's quite a different language. It's developed. So it's a classical Arabic word, and it's based on the Arabic root consonants Sin, Lam, Mim, or SLM, to translate it into the Roman alphabet or a Latin alphabet. And you have to understand how Arabic works. It's of a different language family, so it's different from, say, English or Latin or, say, Indo-European languages. And it's based on roots, the roots of consonants, and it's written from right to left, not left to right. So you have to read the opposite way that we would read normally, from right to left. So sin, the letter sin or S or lam or L or mim, M. Okay, and these root consonants make up the basic meaning of the word, and then how you add vowels to it tells you what the word means. Okay, so you have the basic root consonants, and then the vowels that are added on, and it can change what it is from a noun to a verb or whatever. Okay, so Islam, and these are the Arabic letters themselves as they're written. So Islam comes from this root, this basic root of consonants SLM or Sin Lam Mim, which has the basic meaning of safety, security, or well-being. Okay, so these three consonants that used together will convey the meaning of safety, security, or well-being. Or another way of putting this is to be at peace, for someone to be at peace. The most common way that these words are translated, or this word is translated, when you have Islam, you add the vowels, I and A, and you get Islam in it, is submission or surrender. In other words, to make peace. Okay? The root consonants of SLM have that meaning of to be at peace, security and safety. And when you put an I in front of it and add an A and call it Islam in Arabic, classical Arabic, it has the meaning translated as surrender or submission, which is another way of saying that you make peace with someone or something. So that's commonly how the word is translated into English. People will say that Islam means submission. Submission, submission to what or to whom? To God, ultimately to God, surrendering to God. So Islam is to achieve peace or security by giving oneself to God's mastery. Or another way of putting it is to make peace with God by surrendering to Him. And a person who makes Islam, makes this act of surrender to God, is called a Muslim. So you notice how the root consonants are there, SLM, all right? And you add different vowels and actually add a prefix to it, the M, all right? And that becomes one who submits. This would be submission, Islam, but a Muslim is a person who makes surrender or submission to God. That would be for a man. For a woman, it's Muslimah, for a female. Okay, so Muslim is a man, and a Muslimah or a Muslima is a woman. One who makes submission. Traditionally in English, you can also spell the word Muslim. Okay, you'll hear people pronounce it that way, Muslim. Okay, I'm kind of a traditionalist by my bent, my natural nature, but I do try to incorporate the new spellings. Now you'll spell it Muslim with a U and an I. Okay, and stuff like that. So, but I just want you to know, because you might see these different spellings in the textbook sometimes, but in other writings as well. And it's the same thing, Muslim, a Muslim or a Muslim. It's the same thing. Just Muslim is a more traditional spelling. It's how English people heard the word when they heard Muslim. What is the basic faith of Islam? What is Islam in a nutshell? Well, we want to look to this, the Shahada, what's called the Shahada. This word Shahada is an Arabic word which means witness or testimony. The Shahada. So the witness or the testimony And what is the definition of what the Shahada is? It is Islam's basic statement of belief in God and in his messenger, Muhammad. Okay. Kind of like in Judaism, they have the Shema. In Christianity, you have the creed. Hinduism really have no creed to speak of. But in these religions, you do, and you do have a creed of sorts. You could call this a creed as well. In Islam, this is the essential creed of Islam, that there is one God only, and that Muhammad is God's central messenger. Short and sweet. I testify or I witness that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. You'll see that I have in brackets there, Allah. Allah is not really the name of God. Sometimes people will confuse that and think, because Muslims use the classical Arabic word Allah all the time. They use it a lot to refer to God. But it's not really a name for God. All right? It's not his name. It's just an Arabic word which means literally the God, the only God, I guess. And Muhammad is called the Rasul in Arabic. So this statement, and I'll come back to Rasul in a moment, proclaiming this statement, proclaiming the Shahada in faith with belief in front of acceptable witnesses is the only requirement for making a person a Muslim and entering into the community. Okay, so you'd have to, if you really believed in Islam and wanted to become a Muslim, it's very simple. You say the Shahada, you say this short statement in front of witnesses, and you're a Muslim. Okay. This statement of faith, the Shahada, is also said every day when announcing the time to pray, and it's also said by a Muslim during their daily prayers. So it's repeated every day if you're a faithful Muslim and you say your prayers. As I said, Allah simply means the God in Arabic. Note that it does not say that Muhammad is a prophet, interestingly enough. It says that not a prophet per se, it calls him a Rasul, a messenger. He's the messenger of God. And that is how Islam understands prophets. Okay, and it's not really that much different from prophethood as we talked about with Judaism when we talked about the Tanakh, and there's a whole section devoted to the writings of the prophets, the Nebi'im. That what is a prophet? A prophet is basically a messenger of God. He brings the word of God to the community about commenting on present and future events. So same kind of idea. They emphasize the messenger portion of it. So that's how Islam understands prophets. They bring God's message to humanity, usually as a warning for how people are supposed to act. So sometimes Muhammad himself is called a warner in the Quran, in the sacred scripture of Islam. That's how he's also described, as a warner. He comes to warn mankind about how they should be worshiping God and probably are not. And here we have a pictorial or a depiction of the Shahada on the flag of Saudi Arabia, where all these events that we're going to talk about with Muhammad and the founding of Islam took place in the modern day country of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And on their green flag, they have in Arabic the statement of the Shahada. Okay? They also have a sword, and I believe the sword, if I remember correctly, has to do with the Saud family. I think the Saud family went to war with the neighboring tribes, and that's how they brought them all under the control of a large part of the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, under the control of the Saud family, and established their kingdom. So they commemorate that fact with a sword on it. But the statement of faith is there, and it seems appropriate to the country since this is where Islam came from. I was playing when I was playing music when you came in, and it is the Shahada. If we listen. I want to get to the beginning. I don't think this is the beginning. Well, maybe if I go to the beginning, I'll get the beginning. So they start out when the person is proclaiming the Shahada to call people to prayer at the mosque. You know, they sometimes you see mosques and they have these turrets, the minarets, the towers that a person will stand in, or sometimes they'll just have speakers or whatever, and it will proclaim out the time the call to prayer, and they'll repeat the Shahada, calling people to prayer. They start that by saying, as maybe you could hear him saying, Allahu Akbar, God is great, which I'll talk about later. But that's his basic translation. God is great. And then he starts singing the Shahada. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Now, if you listen closely, you can hear the first word that he says, ashahadu. So I believe, I witness, I testify. So remember, shahada, okay? It's the same root letters, okay? So shahada, a witness or a testimony, it says, ashahadu, I testify, I witness that Allah, maybe you heard him say Allah is the ilah, there's no ilaha than God, another word for God. So there's no God other than the God. أشهد أن Muhammad, you hear the name of Muhammad? Okay, so Muhammad is the Rasul of God, is the messenger of God. All right, let's talk about this dude, Muhammad, the prophet, or the messenger of God, or in the long form, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad the son of Abdullah, also known as the Prophet Muhammad, also known as possibly Ahmad, which is a version of the name Muhammad. So sometimes he's called Ahmad as well, but more commonly he's called Muhammad. You can see when he was born around 570 AD and he died in 632. His name in Arabic means praiseworthy. Praiseworthy. And he is considered the seal of the prophets. He's considered the last of the prophets, prophets which begin with the first man, Adam, and end with Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, or Isa, as he's commonly called by Muslims, Isa in Arabic. As I said before, you might notice some overlap between Islam and Christianity and Judaism, stuff that we've learned already. Yes, you will, because you'll find that Jesus is accepted as a prophet. Adam is mentioned in the Jewish scriptures. He's the first man in the book of Genesis. So that tells you something about where Islam's origins are. There are connections to Christianity and Judaism. So he's the last of the prophets, and he is the only prophet who's communicated perfectly the revelation from God to humanity. What is the essence of, or what was the essence of Muhammad's teaching? Okay, what does he bring to the party? What's his special sauce, you might say? Well, first of all, the teaching that there is one God only. And you might notice the repetition of one here, singleness. There's one God only. There's also a final single prophet. There is one divine revelation given in one scripture. Or I should say there's one scripture. And there is an ummah, a community united around belief in that one God, that one prophet, and that one scripture. This is a picture of Muhammad from a book from the 1300s. And you can see this is how he's often depicted. Usually don't depict his face. You really shouldn't, Islam is kind of hesitant to do images and stuff like that because they can lead to idolatry, especially images of sacred figures. So they do kind of depict Muhammad, but they won't depict his face out of respect for who he is. Although not always. You will find Muslim writings that actually have pictures of Muhammad with a face. So it wasn't always a hard and fast rule, but especially nowadays, you just don't depict Muhammad's face. And instead of a halo in their culture, they have fire burning up from his head. So for holy people, instead of a halo, a circular thing around the head, you see maybe Christianity. You see Christianity. You also see it in like Buddhism and stuff like that. They use fire, flames of fire coming out of the person's head. So sometimes you see Jesus depicted that way, Muhammad. Okay, so that's just a picture of him. Of course, I don't know what he looks like. I have no actual pictures of Muhammad, but this is an artist representation of the man. He was born in the city of Mecca, or as it's also called, Makkah, in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Here's a map for you. You have Saudi, or the Middle East, or the Near East. You have Africa here, you have Egypt, countries, a modern country of Saudi Arabia, other countries around. This is called the Arabian Peninsula. It's a peninsula because it's bounded on three sides by bodies of water. Okay. So anyways, and here where the red circle is where the ancient city of Mecca was, or still is, I should say. And that's where Muhammad is said to have been born. Mecca was a prosperous city situated along a trading route from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. So, boats and ships would come along from the Indian Ocean, which is over here, because it's so-called because it's dominated by the subcontinent of India. People would sail over here, and they port somewhere, and then you can follow along the coastline of the peninsula and go all the way up to the Mediterranean Ocean, which you just get on other boats and you go out and you could do business and ship your stuff and sell things. But notice that along the way you had this city of Mecca, so people are going to stop there. It's at a good location. So location, 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 as realtors say, right? So it was a place for people to stop, to rest, to worship their gods, maybe sell some things. Okay, so it was a prosperous city along a trading route. It was also a religious center. The businessmen would come with their own gods and goddesses that they worshiped, and they would set up shrines in the city to accommodate. That's good business. You want people to come to your city, so make sure they have something to do and some place to go to church, in a manner of speaking. There were no churches there, obviously, at this time. Not that I know of. But so it was a religious center with many idols and shrines, the greatest of which was the Kaaba, which in this previous picture you can see Muhammad is kneeling before this black building called the Kaaba, this shrine. Which was an ancient sanctuary, an ancient place of worship that was known for having a black stone in it. What's the black stone? I don't know. I don't know if they've been able to do any tests on it because it's such a sacred object in Islam. But people theorize that it might have been a meteorite, something that fell from space to the earth, and way back when, long before Islam, and was just an anomaly. It was something unusual, and they kept it, and they stuck it in the Kaaba to be venerated, or at least looked at by people. So you have a definition of what the Kaaba is. It's a shrine in the sacred mosque of Mecca, which is the focus of Muslim prayer and pilgrimage, as it will become later. It certainly was a focus of prayer and pilgrimage during the time of Muhammad for these people who would show up to worship their gods. So the Kaaba goes back to a time before Muhammad. Many tribes in the Arabian Peninsula were polytheistic. They worshipped various divinities, gods, spirits called jinn. related to our word genie. Okay. You ever saw whatchamacallit? What's the name of the movie? Now I'm not remembering the name of the movie. It had Robin Williams in it. I remember that. Aladdin. Thank you, Ms. Undercuffler. And the evil genie, or the good genie. Robin Williams played the good genie, okay? So a jinn is a spirit, so they believed in gods and goddesses and spirits of the desert associated with natural phenomena, the clouds, storm clouds, the moon, the sun, the desert itself, stuff like that. And, the Kaaba itself was said to have contained almost 400 idols and shrines to the gods. However, we know from archaeological evidence that there seems to have been a belief in a supreme god called Allah, the God. Okay, so even that idea seemed to pre-exist Muhammad. He didn't necessarily come up with it. Here's a modern-day picture of the Kaaba, and it's still there in Mecca. And it's a great mosque and stuff like that. You can see people walk around it for prayer and stuff like that. Talk about that more when we talk about Muslim prayer, but just, there it is. But there were exceptions to this model, okay? There were non-polytheists in the region. The Hanifs, there were exceptions. People who were called Hanifs, who are mentioned in the Quran, the sacred scripture of Islam, who seem to have been monotheistic groups on the Arabian Peninsula. They believed in only one God, and they rejected idolatrous practice, the idolatrous practices of most of the other tribes. And interestingly enough, these Hanifs, the word that's used, claim to go back to the Jewish patriarch Abraham, or Ibrahim as they call him. So there's this interesting tradition that connected these Hanifs, these monotheists in Arabia, with the Jews in Israel. And so we have a quotation, I give you a quotation here from chapter 3 in the Quran, where it talks about Abraham. Abraham was not a Jew or yet a Christian. He was an upright man, a Hanifan. So these were upright people because they believed in the one God. They weren't polytheists. So he was an upright man who had surrendered Musliman, and he was not of the idolaters. So he was, in a sense, Ibrahim of the Jews is recognized as, in a way, almost already a Muslim, even though obviously he came before Islam. But he's called Musliman. He's called the one who has surrendered or submitted to God. He didn't worship idols. Although if you read about Abraham in the book of Genesis, you kind of wonder. Because the early Jews did kind of have, like, Abraham and Jacob, his kids, did seem to have idols in their But this is the Muslim story, not the Jewish story. So, yeah, so let me just give you a little background on this. How does this happen? Or how do we think this happened? At least from the Muslim point of view, how did this happen? Well, you had Abraham. You should remember Abraham from Judaism, who's the ancient ancestor of the Jews. God reveals himself to this man Abram or Abraham, and remember, makes a covenant. And what's the covenant? What are the benefits of the covenant? Does anyone remember God's covenant with Abraham? Does anyone remember? Is anybody awake at the time? Were you watching cats play the piano? Yes. We're watching Beyonce's new country album. Listen to it, I should say. I see the earbuds. I'm not blind, even though I don't have my eyeglasses on. What is country about her album, anyways? Isn't it like pop songs with a cowboy hat? Mr. Holstein, what do you think? Supreme power to Abraham, giving Abraham supreme power? Something. Okay. All right. Yeah, in some ways, giving Abraham power over later people, because they will claim him as the source of their relationship with God. So yeah, you have a point there, sir. I saw her first, but Ms. Undercover, what do you think?
We like promise land, and in return, like they get circumcised.
Okay, good. Land. What were you going to say?
Same thing, land.
Same thing. Land is.
Descendants too.
Huh?
Descendants too, like family.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. So land and many descendants. Okay, so yeah, God makes a covenant with this man Abraham. He says, "I'm going to give you this land that I'm sending you to. I'm going to give you a lot of children." And one of the things he requires of Abraham is to circumcise at least the male children, amongst other things, and also to worship God as the only God. This God is the only God. So okay, so yeah, he takes Abraham from where he is. He enters into a special relationship. He says that I'm going to give you the land. I'm going to give you children, which I don't know. God seems to dilly-dally on that part. Abraham gets a little bit anxious because he's getting older and God still hasn't delivered on the child. And so Abraham's wife, remember Sarah, or Sarai is his wife, she says, okay, take my maidservant, my servant girl, and have sex with her, and I'll basically adopt the child as my own. So it will be from you, Abraham, technically. So it will be our adopted child. Abraham's like, okay. You don't have to tell men twice to do that, apparently. You know? Anyways, so he does that, and he actually has his first child called Ishmael, whose mother is Hagar. The servant girl's name is Hagar. Okay, and so Abraham and Sarai adopt Ishmael as his child, as his child, and eventually God does finally come good on his promise, and he produces a son. You know? He finally does produce a son, and Abraham and Sarah themselves have Isaac from Sarah herself. Well, Sarah, Sarah kind of looks on Isaac as the really legitimate child, even though he's not technically Abraham's first kid, because he has that with Hagar, Ishmael. Sarah, doesn't want that opposition between the two children. Doesn't want any controversy. So she eventually, obviously she likes her child, the child that came from her, Isaac, and she tells Abraham, kick out the slave girl, the servant girl, Hagar, and her child, get rid of them. She doesn't like them anymore. And so Abraham does. And according to the story, if I go back to our map, remember Abraham and Sarah, they're living here in the land of Canaan. And so Hagar is kicked out. And according to, at least from the Islamic story, they travel down into Arabia where they settle. And maybe Abraham even comes down with them and visits them at times. So that's part of the story as well. Abraham actually travels down to Arabia and goes places as well. But certainly Ishmael and his mother Hagar are kicked out of the family, and they have to travel down here into Arabia, okay, where they settle. And so that's where the connection for Islam comes between Islam and Abraham, the ancestor of the Jews. So that's where Islam comes from, ultimately. And then from their perspective, Isaac and then Jacob and the others, that's where the Jews come from. So for Muslims, they see themselves really as, and especially the Muslims from Arabia, see themselves really as direct descendants of Abraham, the one that God revealed himself to, and kind of as the successors of the revelation to Abraham. The Jews corrupted later on. And so if you ever wonder why there's so much, maybe it seems like there's so much animosity between Judaism and Islam, or Jews and Muslims and all this, what's going on, this whole, well, it kind of goes back to these ideas. You really have like an inter-family squabble from the perspective of Islam, because they're all related. Christianity, of course, is not. Christianity comes right out of Judaism with Jesus. And then there's a break into rabbinical Judaism and Christianity. But Islam sees itself as a separate line, coming also from this man Abraham through Ishmael. So that's how they trace themselves back. And that's how they see their connections with the Jewish people. They are connected with the Jewish people, in a way. So that's why we have this idea that, Abraham was, that's how Muhammad explained how you had these monotheists living in Arabia. But you also had Christians and Jews living in Arabia. I mean, this is the 7th century when Muhammad was active. And, so you already had, Christianity and Judaism had been around centuries before that, obviously. And so we know that there were Christians and Jews in the area. There were many Jews who settled in and around north of Mecca in a city called Medina. There were Christians in Ethiopia across the strait, was it the Strait of Hormuz or the Persian Gulf? I'd have to look at my map. What's my map say? Or the Red Sea, excuse me. So you have, down here is Ethiopia. So you had Christians there, Christian community there. And you had Christians, up here in the borderlands of Byzantium, of the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay, so you had Jews here in the deserts and then here in the city and stuff like that. So you had Jews and Christians who were around the area as well. At age 25, Muhammad became a leader of caravans. People put stuff on a camel and put their goods on the backs of a camel or a donkey or something, and then would use that as transport to transport their goods and sell them. So he became a leader of caravans for a businesswoman named Khadija, is her name, which is interesting. That it tells you that yes, it was probably a patriarchal society where men were at the forefront, but not always. Here's this woman who has her own business and selling goods. But anyways, he works for her and eventually marries her and has 2, maybe 3 sons with her who all died in infancy. And he had 4 daughters with her. Khadija, she's very important to the story. As you might know, if you've already read the readings for Islam, you'll know what I'm going to tell you about her importance and how she factors into the story, because that's in one of the readings, which tells us, after God reveals himself to Muhammad, her role in that and helping him figure it all out. Anyways, around 610 AD is when we have the occurrence of this event, the supernatural event called the Night of Power. Laylat al-Qadr in Arabic, the Night of Power. Layla means night and Qadr is power. So the Laylat al-Qadr, the Night of Power, which is being commemorated right now with Ramadan, this month of fasting by Muslims that's going on right now. I think we're about halfway through it. But it's to commemorate this supernatural event in 610. Muhammad felt the need to search for the truth about God. He was restless about spiritual things, and so he liked to spend time alone in the desert thinking about God, thinking about the spiritual world and stuff like that. And he saw increasing isolation on a local mountain, Mount Hira, which you can see a picture of right here, Mount Hira, Hira, H-I-R-A, Hira. And one of the times, he had a number of supernatural experiences. During one of these experiences, he described it as it felt like his soul was being ripped out of his body and stuff like that. And I think another experience had some being take his heart out and then put it back in or something like that. But he had these supernatural experiences while going up to Mount Hira, and he felt a strong sense of a presence, which he later described as the angel Gabriel, or as he's known in Arabic, Jibril. Oh, I put it up there in the PowerPoint. Good. Jibril. And Jibril accosts him, almost like physically manhandles him, although I guess angel handles him, because an angel's not technically a man. But anyways, accosts Muhammad in a manner of speaking and tells him to recite God's revelation, which he sees before him. He sees, I don't know, mentally or somehow he sees God's revelation. And so Muhammad starts going into ecstasies, receiving visions of poetic verses, apparently written by God, that he must then recite. And Quran 96, I think I quote it later, I quote it in the next slide, but I believe Quran chapter 96 is believed to be this first revelation, the first of the revelations that Muhammad received when Jibril showed up to him and said, recite, told him to recite the revelation. Yeah, there it is. Recite, ikra, Quran means recitation, the Quran. Again, see the root consonants here, Q, R. Okay, so ikra, to recite, or recite. In the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Sometimes it's translated as a clot of blood. You know, it's the Arabic word is very weird. It's not sure exactly what it means, but it's translated here as a clinging substance. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. Okay, so God teaches people how to write and to write stuff down. Anyways, teaches by the pen. So this surah, which is called the clot, or this chapter 96, which is called the clot of blood, after this word alakin, which is translated here as a clinging substance, or sometimes clot of blood. The chapter of the clot of blood is believed to be, or have been, the first revelation that he received on that night, the night of power. How they know this, I don't know. I'm not an Islamic scholar. I'd have to ask somebody and ask them how technically they know this, but they just know. Just go with it. So Muhammad has these ecstasies and receiving these revelations that he's seeing in his mind's eye, and Muhammad thought he was going insane. He thought he was going crazy. And people thought he was possessed by a jinn. But this is where his wife comes into play, Khadija. He goes to his wife and he tells Khadija what's going on. And she advises him, she's a very wise woman, and she advises him to test the truth of what he's been experiencing. And she brings Muhammad to this ascetic who is living in the desert. There was a hermit. You know, remember, asceticism. We talked about this before, I believe, all the way back with Hinduism, when we talked about yoga, right? About asceticism, which is spiritual exercise, things that people do physically and mentally to discipline their spirits, to discipline themselves spiritually. And so there was a hermit, you know, who lived out in the desert, so he devoted his time to prayer and reading the scriptures and whatever, a holy man, you might say. And she brought him to this holy man, this hermit out in the desert, who happened to be a Christian. He was a Christian hermit. And, you know, Muhammad lays it before this guy, and this dude, this Christian hermit, basically tells Muhammad, well, you know, if it's of God, then let it be. Let God take you where God is taking you. Okay? And so Muhammad feels better about that, and he listens, he kind of gives himself over to what's going on and feels that he needs to begin preaching this new message, that that's where God is leading him to. And so he begins preaching this new message that he was receiving, these revelations that he believed he had been given. The essence of this message was the oneness of God, that there's only Allah, there's only the God, against the assumed polytheism of the Arabian tribes, and that people had to submit to the will of this God, Allah. And he gained a small group of followers. Some people came over to his message. They accepted his message. But, you know, in general, there was opposition to his preaching against polytheism. As you might imagine, it threatened the status quo of the traders and the merchants because, you know, the pilgrimages to the shrines in Mecca were an important source of income and business. It brought in money. It brought people and brought their money with them. So there was an economic reason for their opposition. Maybe they also had theological, religious reasons because maybe they were devout, sincere polytheists. And they thought, no, there isn't one God. I don't know. But anyways, there was generally opposition to his message. And at first, Muhammad and his followers were forced to live in a ghetto, but he was kind of, meaning they had to live all together by themselves in one area of the city for protection. And he was already kind of protected because Khadija was apparently a prosperous businesswoman, so she had some power in the community. Also, his uncle was well known and respected, so he had some family protection. But then Khadija dies, so that protection is gone, and then his uncle died, so there's no more protection. So the knives come out, is Monty. So things start becoming a little bit too hot for Muhammad and his followers to handle in Mecca. So in 622, this next major event in Islamic history occurs called the Hijra, or Al-Hijra in Arabic, which literally means in Arabic the emigration, the moving out, the migration out, the emigration, the Hijra, the flight of the Prophet Muhammad from the city of Mecca to Medina, which does mark the beginning of the Muslim calendar. I have an old definition here, actually. The migration of Muhammad and his companions, I should say, from Mecca to Medina. So going back to the map, here's Mecca, and Medina is up here. So they had to move north to this city. Actually, Muhammad is asked by the people there. They've heard his message, and they asked Muhammad to come up there, which he does, and which was a good thing for him because he really did need to leave. And they leave little by little as to not be conspicuous about it. Little by little, his followers leave the city and move up to Medina in the north, and then finally Muhammad does so himself. At the time, this city was named Yathrib. There it is on the PowerPoint. It was called Yathrib, and it was a divided city. People were at odds with each other. Some people in Yathrib had already accepted Muhammad's message before, and they later asked him to come in order to bring unity to the city, to unite the people. So Muhammad and around 70 of his followers from Mecca left the city and went to Yathrib. And do I want to say that now? Okay, I'll mention that in a moment. And for the Islamic calendar, for Muslims, this emigration, Al-Hijra, marks the beginning of the Islamic era and the Islamic calendar. Not when God first gives the revelation to Muhammad. That doesn't begin the Muslim calendar. But the Anno Hijri in Latin, Anno Hijri or AH, that happens in 622. This migration is what begins the Muslim calendar. So that's what Muslims, if you go to an Islamic country like Saudi Arabia, they won't date their calendar from Anno Domini, from the birth of Jesus. So it's not 2024 in Saudi Arabia, it's 1445 AH. The Anno Hijri, the year of the Hijra or the Hijra of Muhammad and his followers. It's in Medina. Well, I'm saying Medina. It's in Yathrib, also known as Medina. I'll explain that in a minute. It's in Yathrib that the Muslim community becomes fully organized around Muhammad as its religious and political leader. Okay, notice religious and political. So it's not just, there's no distinction between the state and most, ancient world. There really was no distinction between politics and religion. They were the same reality. I mean, the gods existed. So people just acted like that in their whole lives. So he was both a religious and a political leader. He made decisions on the religious faith, how they believed in God, but also in the community, negotiating between people on political matters and stuff like that. And because, Yathrib, its name is changed because of the prominence that Muhammad achieves. It becomes not Yathrib, it's not Yathrib anymore, but it's called Al-Madinat al-Nabi. And Madinat, or Medina, as it's later called, means simply city or a town. And Nabi means prophet. So the city of the prophet, the town of the prophet. So they rename it for Muhammad. It's no longer Yathrib, it's Al-Madinat al-Nabi, also known as Medina for short. So its name is changed. Why did I put Abyssinia on there? Don't know. I had it there for a reason. It's an ancient word for Ethiopia, but I just don't remember why. Oh, I think they wanted, maybe I didn't put it in my notes. I think I have a memory that they wanted to go to Ethiopia first. Well, maybe. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Moving on. It was in Medina, and so now I'll start calling it Medina because the name has been changed because Muhammad's there, and he's kind of the head of the place. It was in Medina that many of the main ritual forms of Islam come into focus. So the regular cycle of prayer that Islam will become known for, almsgiving, giving money and food to the poor, fasting during Ramadan, pilgrimage to Mecca, making trips to Mecca to honor the Kaaba, venerate the Kaaba. And also Muhammad gave many legal prescriptions for areas in which Arab custom was unsuitable. So this shows his political side. So inheritance laws, incest, things like that. He had to make decisions like that, legal decisions for the community. So he really was kind of ruling the community, kind of took over, his group took over. It's in Medina that we find the kind of the true organization of the Ummah, as it's called. The Ummah, which is the Arabic word for the community, the united community of those who have submitted themselves to God and accept Muhammad as his prophet. And they're already on the PowerPoint. It's there what I've told you. I have to reorganize my notes. But it's on the PowerPoint what I just told you about. The Ummah starts being organized with prayer and almsgiving and Ramadan and pilgrimage. Oh, I also have Hadith on there. I didn't put that in my notes. Yeah, Hadith, which we'll learn about later, which are stories about the Prophet Muhammad and how he lived his faith in this one God. And the Hadith present Muhammad as an example for how to live the Muslim life. So these start to become important during this period of time as well. But there are some problems in Medina. Not so much with the Muslim community, but as with those who are not part of the Muslim communities. The Jews. Remember, there were Jewish communities as I told you, there were Jewish communities in the Arabian Peninsula, and there were tribes of Jews who lived in Medina, or formerly known as Yathrib, who, as you might imagine, did not accept the prophethood of Muhammad. Why would they? They had their own prophets. God had already revealed himself to them. They didn't need another prophet. So, there were Jews in Medina that did ally themselves to some extent with the clans and tribes which accepted his revelation, but most Medinan Jews, as I told you, refused to accept Muhammad as a prophet, and they began to mock his revelations and even to actively oppose him, his kind of power grab in Medina. And so we see Muhammad becoming increasingly bitter, expelling some of the Jews from the city of Medina and even killing others. And if you look, for example, you see a change that occurs in the development of Islam where in the beginning, Muhammad taught his followers through revelation from God that they should pray towards Jerusalem. So at the very beginning of the Islamic movement with Muhammad, when they made their prayers, Muslims all bowed their heads to the city of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the city of the great prophet David. Again, King David was acknowledged as a prophet. And of course, it was the place where Abraham had come from. So you see that connection with Judaism very early on. But once the Jews of Medina start opposing Muhammad and won't accept his message, as I said, Muhammad becomes bitter, and God changes his revelation. Muhammad gets a new revelation. telling his followers to stop praying towards Jerusalem and to start praying towards the Kaaba in Mecca, where Muhammad was from, which creates a little bit of a controversy in the early Muslim community of Medina, because didn't God tell us to do one thing first? Now he's changing his mind? God can't do that. God doesn't change. So Muhammad, you have here in, for example, in chapter 2 of the Quran, the sacred scripture of Islam, verses 142 to 45, where Muhammad has to kind of address this controversy and kind of explain why we're not praying to Jerusalem anymore. Once Muhammad and his followers became strong enough, numerous enough, Muhammad began to organize armed raids against the caravans coming from Mecca. So he started it. Muhammad always wanted to go back to his hometown. I don't think he ever wanted to stay purely in Medina, which he could have done. I think he always, like anybody, you want to go home. My mom sometimes talks about traveling back to Ireland to live. It's never going to happen, Mom, but it's a dream. It's a nice little dream. I don't think the Irish would want us back, even though I am Irish, but I'm American Irish. I'm not really Irish. But people have those dreams, and I think, Muhammad's dream was always to go back to Mecca, his hometown, and to conquer it, take it over, and convert it to his religion, his faith. And so Muhammad and his followers would start to attack, trying to choke off the the economic bloodline of Mecca by attacking these caravans that were coming out from Mecca. And they had some victories and they had some losses, but for the most part, he was kind of successful, at least with just being disruptive. In 630 AD, Muhammad and his followers march on Mecca, the city of Mecca, and they win. They take the city of Mecca with little resistance. And here you have a picture from the same book, I think, Stop with the Blind, in the 1300s. And here again, you have a picture riding on a horse with his followers, surrounded by angels. They're angels marching into the city of Mecca. I'm presuming that's Mount Hira in the background, but anyways. In 630, he rode in triumphantly, went to the Kaaba, and it removed all the idols and pagan symbols, and formally declared Mecca to be a city dedicated only to Allah, to the God. Now, he was a smart politician, okay? Had he been a Christian, he probably would have killed everybody and their dog. Because that's what the Christians do. I shouldn't say. Uh-oh, I'm being recorded. Shh. Well, I shouldn't say it. Well, we never did talk about the Crusades when we did Christianity, but that's what Christians seem to do. The Christian armies seem to massacre people. But Muhammad was smart. He was a good politician. He did not massacre all of his enemies. Instead, he pronounced amnesty on all of those who had fought against him and his believers. The only condition was really accept the faith or at least, I guess, not oppose his new religion or the faith that he was proclaiming in God. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Is that Ms. Pratt? No. And then my eyeglasses on. Mr. Pratt. Okay. So, there's this transfer of, he becomes the ruler of Mecca with minimal bloodshed and, minimal opposition because he's gracious in victory. Okay, he doesn't massacre everybody or his opponents. So, accept Allah and, or at least don't oppose Allah. We'll be fine. Okay. 2 years later, Muhammad dies in 632. Muhammad becomes sick and he nears death. And according to tradition, this is when he delivers famously what is called his farewell sermon. And there you have a definition for what it is. The name for Muhammad the Prophet's final discourse to the Ummah, to the community of Muslims, which confirms the Quran as the basis for Islamic life. Okay, in his sermon, he reminds his followers that he has abolished the blood feuds which meant vengeance. You know, like if someone harmed me, I could go out and harm that person, even kill them, a blood feud. So he stopped this endless cycle of bloodshed amongst the tribes, and taking interest on loans, which were seen as unjust. I wish Muhammad were around today. Have you seen credit cards? Oh, anyways. He told men that they must take care of their wives, and they must believe and follow the book of Allah, i.e. the Quran, as we'll understand, that he had received. Does anyone want to read this? This is from, actually in Hadith, a tradition of Muhammad from the collection by this man Muslim. Anyone want to read this brief little story? Apparently from the farewell sermon. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Dietrich. Dietrich, sorry.
And you would be asked about me on the day of resurrection. Now tell me, what would you say? His followers said, "We will bear witness that you have conveyed the message, discharged the ministry of prophethood, and be wise, sincere counsel." Muhammad then raised his forefinger towards the sky, and as the people said, "O Allah, be witness. O Allah, be witness," saying it.
Thank you. Okay, so he's committing them to that. They acknowledge the fact, and what they've just acknowledged about him, that he's told them the message contained in the book, and he's discharged his ministry, his service as a prophet, and given them the counsel. And he said basically, okay, God witnessed this, what you're saying, and confirming what you're saying, and now you're bound by this. Okay, so you're bound by this revelation that's been given to me. You're accepting it and you're being bound by it. Later, Muhammad dies. Okay, I said he was getting sick and nearing death, so he does die, and he is buried in the city of Medina. I don't know why Medina and not Mecca. But anyways, they bury him in Medina. Oh, okay. Interesting. I'm going to leave most of the treatment of the succeeding history of Islam to the textbook. So make sure you read the textbook and you read the chapter on Islam, because it will go by, just to save some time. So if you want to read the development of Islam through the Middle Ages and stuff like that into modern times as well, look at the textbook, please. I'm just going to talk about some interesting things that immediately occur after Muhammad dies, and are still very important to the history of Islam and affect it to this day. I'm going to focus my treatment on that because they are important. When Muhammad died, he left no obvious successor. This is a problem, or this was a problem. There was no exact provision made for a successor to lead the new community. So what do you do? Does it just end with Muhammad? Is it like, okay, we just have the book now, what we call the Quran, the sacred scripture? Is that it? Or do we appoint somebody else? Does the prophethood continue with somebody? Or is it just ended with Muhammad? This was a big question, and it turns into a big controversy and an argument in the early community. With the death of Muhammad, you had two immediate issues. This is what I'm calling the succession. But you had two immediate issues. First, I'll talk about the Caliph first, and then I get on to the wars of apostasy. Okay, so I do that first. I'll do the succession first. First, you had the question of succession. A Khalifa, the Arabic word Khalifa, which means successor, to come after. Or as it's commonly given in English, a Caliph. And here you have a definition, the title for the successors of Muhammad. Okay, the Caliphs. Muhammad never clearly named a successor, as I said. And perhaps, as indicated in the farewell sermon, perhaps he thought the book of Allah that he had been given would be enough to guide the community. That's my thinking. Maybe that's all he thought they needed. During his ministry, he apparently mentioned several times two treasures or weighty things that he had given to the Muslim community, the Ummah, their community. The first one was the Quran, the scripture that he had given them, the sacred writing, the book. And the second was his family. So the book and his family were the two treasures he had given to his community, the people of my house. Now, Muhammad had had many wives during his lifetime. This was nothing unusual in the culture in which he lived to have more than one wife. And he had had many wives, but no male child had survived. So there's no, you could have just looked at his first eldest male child according to the culture and said, okay, he's the one who succeeds the prophet. But there was no one to choose because they had no male children. So what to do? Well, there were two possibilities. One possibility was to choose the best or the most able person for the job. Especially someone who was favored by Muhammad during his life. Okay, that someone Muhammad very much respected, okay, and was the best man for the job. The other choice was to choose from amongst Muhammad's blood relatives. And this was actually the normal procedure in Arabic or Arabian culture, I should say, that you would choose from the nearest blood relative. Well, according to, from what we know, the nearest blood relative was a man called or named Ali ibn Abi Talib. This dude here, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was Muhammad's cousin. And who had also married one of Muhammad's daughters. So Muhammad was his father-in-law and he was Muhammad's son-in-law. So there was not just a blood relationship, a familial relationship since they were cousins, but there was a marital relationship by Ali having married one of Muhammad's children, his daughter. But a man named Umar, who will show up later, Umar ibn al-Khattab, this man Umar, convinced the community, who was a very strong-willed and pious man, strong-willed, he convinced the community to select another man who was close to Muhammad, not a relative, but he was close to Muhammad, and he was favored by Muhammad, namely Abu Bakr. And so we have this guy chosen. So the community decided for the best man for the job, rather than going with the traditional cultural route of blood relative. Blood relative should have been Ali, but they decided not to go that route, which turns out to be actually a mistake, as we'll see. They choose Abu Bakr. Not a mistake because Abu Bakr was a bad guy. He wasn't. It just is going to provide a rupture in the community because Abu Bakr is not a blood relative. He's close to Muhammad, respected by Muhammad, the best man for the job, and that's the route they decide to go. But there are followers who favored Ali, and they're around today in Islam. They still, to this day, do not accept that tradition, or that decision, I should say, of choosing Abu Bakr over Ali. All right, I think I'll leave it there and come back to the caliphate next week. God bless you all. Have a good weekend. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Maybe I should have done that first. Oh well. No, because Abu Bakr has to deal with it, right? Have a good day, miss.
Thank you.
Have a good day, miss. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good day, miss. Thank you. Have a good day, sir. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Turn this off. Oh, da, 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 da.